Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. We wanted to make a quick video and talk about some issue that has popped up in the past couple years several times when I've talked to people, or I've seen posts on Facebook or posts on my own comments on my own YouTube channel about porting guns and people having problems with tuning their guns for ports, that they've added to their gun. And a lot of people have made it overly complicated because they don't understand the physics, the engineering of different weapon platforms and knowing how to tune it for ports. That's why I have to say, if you're not ready to learn or to try to understand your weapons platform, then probably ought to leave it stock and not worry about porting or comping your pistol. But if you're willing to learn and you're willing to understand what you're going to give and take to get that ported pistol to working 100%, if you're willing to learn and to educate yourself, then it's going to work out probably very well for you. But if you're not willing, or you're just wanting to get a ported pistol and just let it get to the range and it shoot 20% softer and 20% flatter with no problems whatsoever straight out of the box, you just throw in a ported barrel or a comped barrel and you're wanting it to run 100% without doing anything else, you shouldn't expect that, because that's probably not always going to happen. Now, sometimes it may. There's a lot of times it may, especially on a lot of these ported or comped options that are far less aggressive. Now, the way I think, as somebody that ports quite a bit of things and has comped quite a bit of things, the way I think is, why add extra noise and percussion and concussion, more decibels to your gun and just halfway do it? If you're going to add the extra blast and stuff, I'm going to go ahead and port it to about the maximum that platform can handle. Otherwise, it just seems pointless, and just leave it where it is. I don't want to get a 10% muzzle flip reduction and a 10% recoil reduction in the hand. I want to get 25, 30, 40%. That's what I like to go for, is around that range. I don't want 5 or 10%. To me, it's just not worth the extra noise and problems you get out of ports and comps if you don't go the maximum distance with it, so you can really tell a difference when you're shooting fast. So that's one thing to think about. But the main thing we want to get to in this video is, why is it harder to tune a striker fire gun like these two? And I just brought up one hammer fire gun because it's easier to show you. It's pretty easy to show you why a hammer fire gun is easier. And I'm sorry if I'm a little bit all over the place with this video, because I'm trying to explain a lot of different things about the engineering and how these things work. But basically, you've got a lot more tolerances to play with in your spring weights, tuning tolerances to play with in your spring weights and things like that with a hammer fired gun when it comes to porting than you do striker fire guns. And we're going to kind of explain the main reason for that. And I want to get that across to you guys. What's the main reason for having so many issues with trying to get these striker fire guns tuned? And the main thing comes down to, if you're looking at the very biggest problem that you're trying to overcome, is that striker fire guns have really heavy recoil springs, because usually the slides are lighter, sometimes smaller and lighter than the bigger hammer fired guns. That usually, most guns that are hammer fired are bigger and larger, not all of them. But the recoil springs are much heavier, and they have to be, because that striker is leaning, it's laying on the weight of the recoil spring to actually help cock that striker back. And this is the best way I know to put it, and we're going to demonstrate that in a way I hope can come across to you. I've not really done a lot of research before this video to see if this works exactly like I want it to, but I think I can at least get the message across of what I'm saying. But yeah, that striker in here is pulling back as this recoil is pulling forward. So the recoil spring is pushing this way and the striker is pushing this way. So you got that conflict of physics going on, and that dynamic of this platform, of the Striker Fire platform, makes it really hard to lighten the recoil spring enough to allow this thing to cycle if you're ejecting the energy upwards out of the gun instead of forwards and making the slide come back harder. You know, you're having to balance that out, and it becomes a lot harder with this platform because you're already playing a balancing act with the striker spring and the recoil spring. So there's already a tug of war, is a good way of putting it, in this slide system itself. So when you say, I want to port it and I want to get that maximum recoil reduction and muzzle flip reduction on the Striker fired platform, when you port it, you're wanting to, you're now not giving him enough energy into the back of the slide because the ports are taking away a lot of that energy that's pushing the slide back, and you're trying to lighten this spring, but this spring is already playing tug of war with this spring in the striker channel here. And so once you get that out of balance, it starts to become really hard to get it right to where it functions 100%. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate this to you. And what's different about the hammer fired guns is once this hammer is cocked, there is no energy being pressed on this slide backwards, you know, at the opposite direction of the recoil spring. So you don't see that tug of war going on here. And the best way I can explain this is I got this scale out, so I'm going to show you real quick. Even though you may not be able to see it on a video, I'll kind of talk about it, and I will be using a scale so I can kind of prove what I'm saying is true. But when I'm pulling this slide back, it's pretty consistent weight all the way back, even when the gun is cocked, like it would be in a holster or whatever. The gun is cocked, and when you pull this back, I'm getting consistent, pretty much, let's just say 5 to 9 pounds, 5 to 8 pounds push forward. I'm getting that the whole way through, from the very start of the pull all the way back, getting that consistent pull, very smooth, very consistent. With a striker fire gun, and I'm going to show you on the scale, I'm going to use this one as an example. I brought the Glock out, the Glock clone, because, you know, that's one that a lot of people have problems with when it comes to tuning their ported pistol. So I want to kind of bring a Glock because I think it's a very standard platform. This is based off, some parts of this is based off the Gen 3 Glock, some parts are based off the Gen 5 Glock. But yeah, this is very similar. But I just want to show you kind of the problem we have, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a second. But yeah, when I pull this slide back after the gun has been, after the, see, that trigger is cocked and ready to disengage. But what happens with this gun, and this one's even got a slightly lighter striker spring, which is something you have to do. And you know, that's what we was talking about. You have to lighten this spring. Because you're lightening this spring, you have to balance that tug of war in order to make the gun function like it would with a factory barrel on a factory system, you know, factory spring set. So you want to make it function the same way, but you've added ports, so you've changed it, so you have to change that tug of war action between the striker spring and the recoil spring. But this gun, when it's cocked, if you'll notice on this very end of this, I can, with about 3 pounds, 2 pounds of force, I'm moving this slide out of battery. And this is the very reason. This is a 13 pound, I think this comes with a 16, 17 pound spring factory, and this is a 13 pound Glock spring in this gun. And even with the stock spring, it kind of does the same thing, but it's just a little bit heavier. You needed the 13 pound spring to make these ports work reliable, make the gun action come back and make the gun feel softer. So to make it reliable, you had to drop the spring weight. But you can see about 2 pounds of force is pulling this out of battery. That is the very reason, because of this tug of war between the striker and the recoil spring, and that right there, you see just barely coming out of battery with very little force because of that tug of war. that's the reason why you have more malfunctions from improperly tuned striker fire guns. And it's the same way with the Glock platform. If this gun is cocked back, you have that tug of war between the striker spring, and you see this gun has a pretty stiff lockup, so when I pull this back I feel a little bit of that lockup weight, but the spring weight is actually extremely light. Like I feel that. And then after I overcome this pulling or pushing of this striker on the recoil spring, after I overcome that and pass that, then I feel the actual resistance of the recoil spring, and it feels actually more extreme than the hammer fired. But from this distance to this distance, it's way less than on this gun. So that allows me a lot more room to tune that gun for, you know, ports, comps, and things like that. That's why it's so much easier to do that on that kind of system. Now I want to demonstrate this, and here's a good example, and this is what I want to get to. And I know I've talked about it long enough, and I've kind of repeated myself because I really want you to understand people that are having these issues, what's going on. And I'm sorry, you know, I've been a little redundant on this, but let me demonstrate this. So this is an 8-pound spring, 8-pound recoil spring, 13-pound recoil spring. This recoil spring is 5 pounds heavier than this one. However, the reason why you run into failure to feeds, maybe the slide not going all the way back, when you shoot the bullet out, and the energy is not enough coming back into the slide to come all the way back, and you're trying to find that right balance of recoil spring. You got to make sure you're balancing both the striker spring and the recoil spring for these striker fire guns because of what I'm talking about right now. But let's look at this. So this is an 8-pound spring, 5 pounds lighter than this one. 8-pound spring, when I put it on the scale, and I don't think you can read it on the video, but I'm going to show you live on camera. When I put it on the scale and the slide starts to come back, we're already about 7.5, 8 pounds within the first couple millimeters of the slide coming back. 7.5 to 8 pounds with just barely moving the slide back. All these guns are safety checked, by the way. I did that before we started the video. This one, if it's cocked and ready to go, we're going to do the same thing. Like I said, this is supposed to be 5 pounds heavier than that one, but I'm going to demonstrate why this one's harder to tune. And a Glock would be the same way, or any of these striker fire guns, or most of them. Some of them may be a little different and may not be so bad, but most of them are going to be this way. I can actually pull the slide back on this one with a little over 4 pounds. I'm already moving the slide about 1 millimeter or 2 back. Even though it's a 5 pound heavier spring, it's taking far less weight to actually get it out of battery. That means there's not going to be much energy pushing it in fully into battery at the very end of its cycle stroke, you know, of the cycle, the cycling of the slide. So there's not near as much energy. Most of the energy you're relying on is back here, all that centrifugal force coming forward to kind of finish it into battery. But because of that, because this is 5 pounds heavier than this recoil spring, but yet right here at the end of the lockup, where it locks up and going into battery, it's actually taking, this spring only is giving about 4 pounds, and this spring is giving about 7 pounds. It's making the tolerances and the tuning of this pistol and this pistol much harder than this pistol, because we got a lot bigger room to work with on this gun. I hope you enjoyed this video. I can't really go further than that. I think I've explained it pretty well. You've got a tug of war between the striker spring and the recoil spring on these striker fire guns, and that's the nature of the engineering of how they're built and how they're designed to function. And on this one, you do not have that tug of war because the spring of the hammer is all in here, and it does not rely on any of this stuff in the slide to ignite the primer there's no energy that needs to be up in here to cause the round to go off. Whereas the striker fire guns, the energy is fighting with that recoil spring in order to cock the hammer and keep the hammer cocked and release enough energy into the striker and into the primer to cause it to go off. So that's the reason why. If you have any questions about how to tune a striker fire gun or a hammer fire gun, I'll be glad to answer those gun questions kind of vaguely, because I can't never know the exact answer to some of those questions, because I have to have your gun in hand, feel of it, see what it feels like when you're cocking the gun, see what it feels like, see how much striker tension, see how much recoil tension, see how much force is being put in pushing the gun into battery. You have to get a feel for the gun, but if you can explain what's going on, there's a decent chance that I might can help you figure it out. So please leave comments below if you have any questions about these problems. If you've had similar problems to what I've been talking about, or you might be fixing to run into those problems because you're doing this for the first time, please let me know. I think this is a good educational video. I don't think it may not get as many views as some, but I think this will really be helpful to some people. God bless. Please leave comments below, like and subscribe. It really supports the channel. Have a great day.